Welcome to the Industry 4.0 Club's Fireside Chat. The club's purpose is to engage the power of diverse worldwide talent to celebrate the global evolution to Industry 4.0. We accomplish this by hosting and supporting respectful, thoughtful, and interdisciplinary open conversations and creating quality content on wide-ranging Industry 4.0 topics to expand the reach of our community. My name is Mike Ungar, and I'm the CEO of the Industry 4.0 Club. I have over 40 years of leadership and manufacturing experience, most of that with Michelin. I'm joined today by my co-host, Mike Yost, who's chairman of the club. Mike, would you mind introducing yourself, please?
Sure. Thank you, Mike. Thanks, everybody, for being here. As Mike said, my name is Mike Yost. I'm the volunteer chairman of the Industry 4.0 Club. Been in industry for about 35 years, with the last 15 years or so being on the nonprofit side. I'm Mike's co-host with this show regularly, and I am super excited to have Ed Morrison here with us today, talking about improving manufacturing competitiveness with strategic doing. Just let me introduce Ed briefly, and then we'll get on to the conversation. Ed's the CEO of the Strategic Doing Institute. He's the founder and also a senior research fellow of the Conference Board. Ed started his career in Washington, D.C. As a legislative assistant and attorney. He then joined a corporate strategy consulting firm where he conducted strategy studies for large manufacturing companies like Ford and Volvo and General Electric. After that work, Ed consulted with communities and regions on tackling complex challenges of building a prosperous community in an era of globalization. I should also say that Ed is a Cleveland boy at heart, so he and I have strong connections there. His grandfather started a manufacturing company that is still operational today, so Ed certainly earned his chops on the small company floor as well as with those large companies. Ed began his academic career in 2003 as the director of the Center for Regional Economic Issues at Case Western Reserve University here in Cleveland. In 2005, he moved to Purdue University, where he was a staff member at the Purdue Center for Regional Development. In 2016, he founded the Agile Strategy Lab at Purdue. In 2020, he founded the Agile Strategy Lab at the University of North Alabama. Ed received his BA degree cum laude with honors from Yale University, and both his JD and MBA degrees from the University of Virginia. He completed his PhD in economics at the University of Sunshine Coast, which surprisingly is not referring to Northeast Ohio. It's in Australia. So, for those listeners on LinkedIn here today, if you have questions for Ed, please put them in the comment box, and we will do our best to address those issues during the time of our discussion here today.
Well, so welcome, Ed. We're really glad you could take time out of your schedule to join us.
Oh, it's exciting to be here. Thank you very much for the opportunity, really.
Yeah. So let's just jump right in. What can you just describe for our audience briefly, what is strategic doing? And why the name? It's an interesting putting those two words together. Why the name?
Yeah, strategic doing is a discipline. It's a protocol. It's a methodology, if you will, that enables us to do strategy in open, loosely connected networks where we don't have hierarchies around. Nobody can tell anybody what to do. And so strategic doing focuses on two key elements. One is what strategy? In other words, where are we going? How are we going to get there? And then the other issue is doing, and we learn by doing. We learn strategy now by doing. So this is a pragmatic strategy discipline. It works inside companies, it works inside organizations, but it also works in ecosystems and complex environments where you don't have anything, you don't have any control mechanisms in place. You don't have any way to control anything. So you have to develop a strategy quickly.
So Ed, obviously, this applies outside of manufacturing as well as inside of manufacturing. We'll get into sort of the manufacturing experience you have in working with communities in that front. But if we back up a bit, can you describe the journey that led you to formalizing and really scaling this methodology globally? And like, what problem were you trying to solve?
Well, the problem we were trying to solve was the communities left behind or regions left behind in globalization. In the early 80s, I was part of consulting firms that were consulting teams that were essentially pulling manufacturing out of the US and moving it into Mexico, Taiwan, Singapore, places like that. But what was happening was you were leaving behind communities like the one I grew up in, Cleveland, Youngstown, Kokomo. All of these communities were impacted, and we were not addressing the challenge of those economies left behind. So the challenge then became, okay, well, how do we transform these communities? How do we move to the next level of economic development, economic performance? How do we help these communities? And strategic planning doesn't work in that environment. So beginning in 1993 in Oklahoma City, I started working on how do we do strategy in open, loosely connected networks. And within 15 years, I had a model in my head that I worked, and I came to Purdue to validate the model, make sure it worked across multiple situations, and more important, how do I learn to teach it? Because if you can teach it, then you can scale it. So that's the journey in a nutshell.
Excellent. Well, do you want to talk about a couple of examples? You mentioned OKC and Kokomo, and I know you've been all around the world with this. So maybe talk about a couple of examples, types of problems that have been solved, types of results have been delivered.
Yeah. So the Oklahoma City was where we first started working on how do we apply the lessons or insights of open source software development to strategy. So in open source software development, people do complex work. There's no control mechanism in place. Well, how do they do that? Well, the answer is you follow simple rules. But the question is, what were the rules? So we spent about a decade in Oklahoma City transforming the city's economy from, in 1993, it was moribund. It was flat. It had been flat for a decade. Oil crisis had happened, the banking crisis. I often was the only person in the one downtown hotel. It was that bad. But you go to Oklahoma City now, and it's a vibrant ecosystem. It's a vibrant economy. And what we did was teach people how to think differently, behave differently, and do work together differently. That's the essence of strategic doing. You've got to approach these challenges. These are not technical challenges. These are not where we can reach for a book or reach for a routine that we already have. These are not technical challenges. We don't know how to solve these challenges. And so the solutions emerge from a discipline, and that's the discipline of strategic doing.
Yeah, well, I think Oklahoma City is going to be hosting Game 1 of the NBA Finals tomorrow. So
actually, Clay Bennett. Yeah, Clay Bennett's the owner of the NBA franchise, and he was the leader of our work in Oklahoma City. He was the person that I reported to. In 2001, I took this idea that I developed in Oklahoma City, and I taught it to Ernest Andrade in Charleston, South Carolina. Now, Ernest was a city employee, and he was trying to create a digital ecosystem in Charleston. Well, if you go on the web now and look at Charleston Digital, you'll see what Ernest has been able to do. All of these efforts started out small. We had probably the hardest one we've ever dealt with, or the most daunting perhaps, is the challenge of reducing teenage homicide in Flint, Michigan. Our colleagues at Michigan State said, "Can we do this here?" And the answer is, yeah. Again, it's a discipline that you can teach and you can learn. It doesn't matter where you are in position or education levels or any of that. We've taught it to fourth graders. We've taught this to fourth graders. It's just a different way to approach challenges. It's admitting that you don't know the answer, but you've got to come up with solutions. So you have to do that with a discipline.
It's when you talk about that discipline, obviously foundationally it requires the people that are going to be part of that to have a certain open mind, I'll say, or maybe a different way of working. Can you describe that a bit?
Yeah, so this is about designing and guiding conversations. And why do we worry about conversations? Well, it turns out that conversations that lead to learning by doing, follow a particular structure to them. And conversations are critical because that's how we share our knowledge. That's how we share and recombine our knowledge. And when we recombine our knowledge, it's a recombinant innovation. It's taking this and this and creating something entirely new. That's how we generate solutions. But we have to test these solutions. We have to experiment because we don't know. And so you have to also have a routine of continuous evaluation testing. So it's metric heavy in a sense, but the metrics are generated by the teams. So it's not imposing metrics. It's enabling a team to figure out what's the outcome going to look like. How do I measure that? And what progress are we making? And how do I measure my progress? So we have outcome and progress metrics that are baked into the process to keep us on track. This is an opportunity, I think, for us to rethink strategy, because the reason this is growing is because the rules are simple. They're not easy. They take practice to master, and you're not good at all 10 of these rules. But a collaborative team can manage complex projects using this discipline.
And Ed, I think part of the reason it's not easy, and maybe you could talk to the fact, I think people oftentimes want to jump immediately to an answer without being curious and without experimenting, without hearing all the voices. So can you talk maybe a little bit about that, sort of the mindset that you bring?
Yeah. So you have to have a boundary around the conversation. In other words, you have to have a safe space. You have to protect that space, and you have to be very intentional about that. But once you've created a space in which people can start to share what they know, what their assets are, what they know, these are all invisible. We don't know them. And if you create that space in which people can share those thoughts and ideas around what a solution could be and how they could contribute, now you're building the foundation for collective action. Now you're building the foundation for people to move forward and experiment. And again, it's common sense when you really get down to it, but it is a discipline. So it's not something that it's like mastering the violin or learning how to swim or play tennis. You get mastery through practice. And so the mistake people make with strategic doing is they see this simple framework and they think, oh, simple is easy. And the answer is no. It's simple is actually hard. I mean, hitting a golf ball looks easy, right? But anybody who's ever tried to do that recognizes, hitting a golf ball straight is actually pretty hard to do. And so same with a tennis ball. So you appreciate the idea that you've got to practice this discipline, and you practice it in a team, and the team itself is diverse, cognitively diverse, they think differently. And we give people a way to think about cognitive diversity, how you approach a problem. And by bringing cognitively diverse people who think about this differently, science tells us that those teams perform much better in complex environments. And so that's what we encourage is you don't want to have people who think like you. So this is one of the reasons why a lot of entrepreneurs fail. They bring along teams that just think like them. And you got to have somebody who's thinking about, okay, well, how are we going to pay for this, or who's going to buy this?
So before we want to get into manufacturing here in just a second, but we had a comment that I thought maybe I'll put up on the screen from Scott Gillespie. Scott's got mentioned big opportunity for supply chain. So have you worked with? Can you talk to any examples that you might have in that area? Because I think he's exactly right, especially given tariff conversation and what happened during COVID. Maybe you can talk to that for a second.
We've got a couple of things that we're doing in supply chains. One of the most interesting is actually happening in Ecuador. Ecuador during the COVID crisis had to reconfigure supply chains, and so a strategic doing practitioner in the Association of Supply Chain Managers developed a very fast cycle to reorganize and realign supply chains. And so the challenge then becomes, okay, well, you've got to keep the process going. So you got to make it simple. You got to make it low cost in terms of time and resources and the like. So one of our best examples is down in Ecuador of reorganizing supply chains. One of the other areas that we're just starting to work on now is using suppliers and bringing them into the OEM to help redesign product, develop the next generation product. And so again, here the situation is different than typical OEM relationships, where the OEM specifies what the supplier needs to supply and sends out the drawings, and the supplier responds. Here, this OEM is working directly with their trusted suppliers, handful of 15 or 20 trusted suppliers, and they're coming in and saying, here's the outcome. Here's what we're hearing from our customers. Here's the outcome we want to get to. How do we do this? How do we move to the next level of performance in this product?
Well, I think Ed, to your point about this being a collaboration methodology, right? There's a shared value, there's a shared outcome that those supply chain partners have in working together, right? Mm-hmm. Just like if you work in a distressed area, you talked about working with different regions, right? Mm-hmm. There's a shared interest of the people in the region to uplift the region and stuff. So I do think, given what we've been through and what we continue to look at, in the face of tariffs and the whole sort of redistribution of the global supply chains, people are saying, well, how do we come together and behave differently?
Yeah, and so there's a discipline to do that. It's not just, hey, let's come together and figure this out. Yep. Chances are, if you do that, it's not going to end well. Serendipitously, you might be able to do it. But if you follow a discipline, the probability of your success goes way up. And so that's, we know this. I mean, you don't know this about any expertise that you've developed. If you practice a discipline around it, then you can improve your skills. These are a set of cognitive thinking skills. These are a set of thinking skills. And it's managing in that kind of environment is different than hierarchical command and control. It's more of a design and do process. And anybody can do it. It's just different than what I learned in business school and what people have taught and what our organizations tend to reinforce. It's more horizontal. It's more focused around a challenge. It's got to be, the challenge has to be very clear to everyone, because that's how shared purpose or shared interest gets expressed, is through the challenge. Yes, I'm interested in helping you solve that challenge because there's something in it for me to do that. So you have to reframe the problem into an opportunity for creating shared value.
You mentioned design earlier. You mentioned just briefly in passing the idea of engaging suppliers, OEMs engaging suppliers in the design. So I'm assuming that you are working with different manufacturers today. Mm-hmm. What are some of the other types of issues that you're seeing that manufacturers are trying to address through strategic doing?
Yeah, so one of the biggest problems that we've been focused on is the challenge that small mid-sized companies have in making a digital transformation. So the challenge, of course, is that these smaller firms, which account really for well over 90% of our manufacturing base, so probably 45% of our manufacturing employment, they're not really addressed very well with existing supports, and you can't scale the existing systems. They just won't scale. So the challenge is how do we overcome the inherent problems that small and mid-sized manufacturers have: lack of resources, lack of time, lack of expertise in digital technologies. And so the idea here is to provide a peer-to-peer learning and innovation networks. And this is what we're doing with Mike Yost, ManuFuture. We started this at Purdue University, trying to figure out how do we create an infrastructure that supports peer-to-peer learning. The idea is that manufacturers will learn best from other manufacturers. So how do we make that as frictionless as possible? And it turns out that's not a trivial problem. It's a challenging problem, but it's something that we're working on.
Yeah, and I think it's really important as we get into conversations about technology. The way technology is positioned and sold today is really not conducive to the masses accepting it and understanding its fit, et cetera. And it's really hard for people to figure out, well, who do I trust? Which way do I go? So the point that Ed brings up as far as learning from each other. So we have groups of manufacturers that want that peer networking and that peer knowledge transfer. And you use the term in there, Ed, that I think is fantastic. You talk about learning networks, right? So maybe talk a little bit about that, how really what you're building in that area is networks where people can learn.
Yeah. So, well, let me distinguish among three types of networks, because I think, we all talk about networks and networking, but we have to be more precise and clear about what we're talking about here. Yep. We're all part of advocacy networks. I mean, anybody who's part of a manufacturers association is advocating for manufacturing. So that's the advocacy networks work well, but they have a limited purpose, which is to make the cause that we're supporting, whether it's an alumni or association or whatever, more visible. Members of an advocacy network don't necessarily need to know each other. Now, when that changes when we have a learning network. In a learning network, what we're doing is we do know each other, but we're working on our own problems. We're working on our own challenge, and we're looking for guidance from other peers. So, communities of practice, this is a learning network. Most of business associations or legal professional associations have learning networks. But part of what we're focused on, what we've got our real eye on, is innovating networks. Now, these require a high level of trust among members, and it requires a process of experimentation. And it's through innovating networks that we actually create new value. So, for example, reconfiguring a supply chain or working with suppliers in a different way around product development, you've got to create an innovating network. And that means you have to have a predictable process that people can believe in. And it has to be transparent, and it has to be genuine, authentic, and it has to be low cost. I mean, nobody's got tons of money we're going to throw at this. And it's got to be fast. And so that's what strategic doing provides. It's kind of an operating system to enable you to form these innovating networks through learning and then innovation.
Yeah, and that's one thing I'll say that really drew me to strategic doing. For the audience, I've been a fan of Ed's work for a long time, and slowly got introduced to him over the years, and now work quite closely with him, and sort of the social science that you bring, and the understanding of how people learn, and it is just fantastic, and I think applicable as we're trying to help companies work together. And I've been a part of advocacy networks forever, right? I've been advocating for a long time that technology adoption and working together and those sorts of things. But really the missing piece was always how do we guide people to where they need to be, right? Help looks so different depending on where people are sitting and what their needs are. How do you design something where you can actually help them get the help that they're looking for? And so to have a methodology like strategic doing layered in with a group that has common objectives, really, I think is a missing piece as far as my experience is concerned.
Well, it's the important point here especially with Industry 4.0 or digital technologies, is that it's not a technology solution that you're going to go for. What you're really doing is redesigning the information flows throughout your organization or your supply chain. You're sharing your information differently. You're creating information differently. That changes everybody's role. That changes where decisions can be made. That changes everything about the organization. So it's an organizational innovation that you have to come up with. It's not you can use technology to support the organizational innovation, but if you put technology first, chances are you're not going to be successful. If on the other hand, you start out with small experiments and you start building the new patterns of behavior, thinking, routines that you need to support productivity improvement, then your chances of success go way up. Yeah. And so that's the main argument for using a discipline as opposed to just sort of spitballing.
Yeah, you mentioned, Ed, that you're working to sort of on this issue of adoption of Industry 4.0 smart manufacturing for small and mid-sized companies. We have a question, at least I think I understand the first part of it. Dragon asked the question, what are the top 3 challenges that small and mid-sized companies face in terms of operational excellence? And maybe you're not intimate with these relative to the manufacturing piece more than you are strategic doing. So I don't know if it's a fair question for you or not.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the issue of operational excellence. This is one of the areas that Mike Yost can comment on, because we've got a team working on this in Northeast Ohio, and we've got a team working on it at Purdue, in our manufacturer at Purdue. But it's really a question of how do you use the new technologies available, low cost sensors available to you, to improve your productivity, reduce downtime, reduce scrap rates. Now, every manufacturer is different, so every solution is going to be different. It's going to have to be designed by the manufacturers, but you can learn from others who have taken this path. I mean, if there are manufacturers who are ahead of you in terms of digital transformation, those are your best guides. Those are your best guides. So how do we create an environment in which manufacturers are willing to share what they know with each other? Because at the end of the day, we're all in this together. And this is when you think about it from a global perspective. We're all in this together. We've got to redesign manufacturing.
Mike, go ahead, Mike. You have a comment on that question?
Yeah. Just to piggyback on what Ed said, I guess a couple of things. We're using the strategic doing methodology in Northeast Ohio as an offshoot from the work at Purdue, and we have groups of manufacturers that are coming together to address that point specifically, Dragon, as far as how do they go and do and learn from each other. I mean, they have workforce challenges, they have machine issue challenges, that they hear about this technology stuff, but there isn't a clear path forward for defining what the value is in doing it. So we're working here broadly within the region to advocate that manufacturers have a language to use to talk about this, and there are tools and such to help facilitate that. But the group is really getting together. I think part of the magic of strategic doing is Ed talks about these simple rules. And part of the rules is creating a safe space, and then, having a framing question or a definition of where the group wants to go. So we've challenged manufacturers in Northeast Ohio to think about what a future state would look like if we have an abundance of talent, right? Or if all manufacturers in the region were able to operate with world-class efficiency levels. And so people ended up aligning with those different areas, and then started talking about the types of assets that they personally could bring into the team, right? And then, start defining projects that they can go and do. So they're really learning together. And Ed, I shortchanged about 6 or 8 of your steps there, if you wanted to address any of that. But the team is really building trust, learning how to contribute. And what's really interesting for us, we've taken a long time to make sure that we're protecting the trust there. And now they're saying, how do we go faster? How do we go faster? Right? Like, we're comfortable working with each other. We're comfortable sharing in ways that I'd say historically is not the case. Right? You don't typically have manufacturers coming forward saying, hey, here, I'm very open to sharing, what I have with you, because there's a scarcity. Might even be beyond a mindset. It might be a reality, right? There aren't enough workers and there's not enough business and things like that. So I think one of the things that the strategic doing model has allowed us to drill into is creating a safe space, building on a foundation of trust, and then people start to share and define things they can go do together, and learning along the way. So, Ed? Well,
it's designing experiences where trust informs. So trust is an emergent quality. It emerges, right? So what does it emerge from? It emerges from a pattern of reliable behavior. We have patterns of actually saying something and then doing something, saying something and doing something. So how do we build trust? Well, we do that through routines, through standard routines of continuously making commitments and holding each other to them. And as you do that, the speed of the network grows, because the transformation of a supply chain or anything in a network environment moves at the speed of trust. And so if you're very intentional about how you're building that trust, how you're doing that, and that's really what strategic doing does, then you actually accelerate it, you speed up. So perfect example is Oklahoma City. Oklahoma City started with 6 people sitting on the table, one of whom was Clay Bennett, the owner, the NBA owner. Really, downtown hotel, I'm only person in it. It's the capital of Oklahoma. I mean, it's pretty bleak. Now go on to the Oklahoma City website and check it out.
Yeah.
It's a dynamic city, much more dynamic actually than Dallas. And so you have people moving from Dallas to Oklahoma City, which is kind of cool. But that transformation takes time.
It's interesting. So we've been talking for the last 30 minutes or so with Ed Morrison. I just want to remind anybody else, we appreciate the comments from Scott and Dragon, but if there's any other questions for Ed, please drop them in the comment box. Ed, you've been doing strategic doing now for about 2 decades formally. Mm-hmm. Talk about the future. What's on the horizon for strategic doing?
Well, starting in the COVID pandemic, we started seeing a lot of global interest in strategic doing. I started doing my work in Australia in 2016 or 17 when somebody at the University of Sunshine Coast said, "Hey, can you come and teach us how to do this?" Now we see strategic doing hubs emerging all over Latin America, North America, Europe. The Berlin hub is going to launch in June next week. We have Australia, we have strategic doing New Zealand. Why is this? Because we are, aside from manufacturing, we're all confronting complex challenges we don't know how to solve. And the challenge becomes, how do we create a discipline of generating solutions and testing them so that they can scale? So what is a scalable solution? What is a replicable solution? What is a sustainable solution? We need to find these solutions. And the good news is that complex challenges, there's not just one solution. There are many solutions. So we're seeing this take root, as I said, globally. And so our institute now is in the process of moving from a relatively small nonprofit to figuring out, okay, well, how do we manage this? And so we apply strategic doing to strategic doing. That's what we're doing. And we're trying to figure out, okay, well, nobody's ever quite done this before, so how are we going to do it? So we have a team that meets every week to address how we design a modular organization that enables us to support this discipline.
That's really neat. That's great. Well, so as we begin to wrap up here, I wanted to just see if we get some final thoughts. So Mike and Ed, maybe start with you, Mike.
Sure.
We think about strategic doing and really how it can help manufacturers. Could you share just your final thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, if you can see my paper right now, I have 100 different scribbles in here. I think one of the most important points that Ed talks about is that we, we learn by doing, right? Scott contributed here today. Dragon contributed here today. We don't know each other, and so we don't really have a way to connect and do anything together, right? So we'll be connected, and I think if we were working on something together, we have the opportunity to build trust and rapport with each other. We have the opportunity to learn together, and so that's really, I think, a powerful message about the core of strategic doing is to learn by doing.
Well, my takeaway is that this is a big opportunity for leaders, for new leadership. Leadership in teams and networks is different than leadership in a hierarchical environment. Leadership in teams and dealing with complex challenges involves designing conversations that lead us to experimentation and new knowledge and trusted relationships, because that's how we're going to generate solutions. No one organization, no one individual has the solution to these problems. Nobody. And so we have to design that together. Good news is that now there's a discipline that's been peer-reviewed, it's scholarly, it's a new branch of economics, really. It's got the economics of networks. So my attitude is, come in and join us. Experiment. Go to strategicdoing.net is our website. We're redoing it, but you'll find some stuff there. Yeah, and just start. That's
And do I have it right? Is that what it is right there?
yeah, that's right. Yeah, we're redesigning it now, but it's good enough right now for most people to get.
Excellent. Well, so if folks want to learn more, that's the website you can jump on and hopefully reach out to Ed and the team, and let's get out there and solve our problems together, huh?
Yeah, it involves the art, and it's the reason strategic doing is spreading globally is because it's actually fun to do. People enjoy it, and they have good experiences with it, and so that's different from at least the experience I had with strategic planning, which was not very much fun. So,
if I could add an anecdote to that point, Mike, before we close here,
all right.
When Ed first met the team at Manufacturing Works, because the smile on his face is what he brings to every conversation. He loves to learn, and we look at every opportunity. Everything we go and do is an opportunity to learn, right? And everybody, the people that are in the room are the right people to be in the room. And the first thing that my teammate from Manufacturing Works said when she met Ed was, we know how to party. And he said, we have to. Like, this has to be fun. This has to be a place where people want to come, right? And so he really means it. He lives into that point about the fun.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
I've lived long enough that I know the things that I started 30 years ago have grown. And so my wish for everyone on this call is that you find a legacy that you want to pursue and you do it. Just go and do it.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. Thanks, Ed. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Ed. We really appreciate you sharing your insights today about strategic doing and how it can impact manufacturing. So again, thanks for taking time. So just a quick comment about the club before we wrap up. The Industry 4.0 Club would like to encourage you to take action. We've heard about some opportunity to do that today, but in general, to advance the deployment of Industry 4.0, and that could be read an article, attend a workshop, engage in a strategic doing project, let's say, or conversation, develop a roadmap for smart manufacturing in your plant, or encourage your plant to take that action for the deployment of Industry 4.0. We'd like to know what you're doing. So drop us a note on our LinkedIn page or our website at www.industry40club.com. We hold these conversations weekly, and we certainly would love to have a conversation with you. If you'd like to join us in one of our conversations, please also reach out to our LinkedIn page or our website and let us know. On behalf of Ed and Mike, again, thank you, and we wish everybody a great rest of the day and a good rest of the week.
Excellent. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.